Here's the direct point. Microsoft is systematically removing your ability to set up a Windows 11 computer without signing into a Microsoft account. Not discouraging it, not nudging you toward it. Removing the option entirely, one update at a time, until the workarounds that used to let power users escape it stop working too. And in June 2026, that campaign hit a new level of aggression that has pushed the backlash from ordinary annoyance into outright accusations of dark pattern design. Let's be clear about what a local account actually is, because the distinction matters. A local account is simply a username and password that live on your PC and nowhere else. No email required, no cloud sync, no Microsoft server checking in on your login. It's the way Windows worked for decades. A Microsoft account, by contrast, ties your PC to an online identity, the same identity used for Xbox, Office, OneDrive, and Copilot. And it syncs your settings, your files, and a meaningful amount of diagnostic and usage data back to Microsoft servers. Now, nobody's arguing that Microsoft accounts are useless. They genuinely do offer real benefits. Seamless device syncing, OneDrive backup, Microsoft 365 integration, the ability to pick up where you left off on a new machine. If you want that, great. It's a legitimate feature. The controversy has never really been about the existence of Microsoft accounts. It's about the disappearance of choice. For years, Windows quietly kept a local account option tucked away in setup for anyone who wanted a machine that just worked, offline with no strings attached. That option is being deliberately dismantled. Here's the timeline, because it shows this isn't a one-time decision. It's a pattern that has escalated year after year. When Windows 11 first launched back in 2021, the local account option was already de-emphasized but technically present. Starting with version 22H2, Microsoft made an internet connection and a Microsoft account mandatory during first-time setup for home editions. Pro Edition users still had an out. During setup, you could choose Domain Join instead, a business feature meant for corporate networks and not actually join a domain. That click-through trick left you with a local account, no strings attached. Tech-savvy users found other cracks too. There was the OO-bet bypass and row command, a hidden command you could type into a terminal window during setup that forced Windows to skip the network-required screen and offer a local account option instead. There was the classic email trick. Type in a deliberately invalid or already blocked email address at the Microsoft account prompt, watch Windows throw an error, and get redirected to a local account creation screen as a fallback. There was the low-tech option too. Just don't connect to Wi-Fi or physically unplug the Ethernet cable before setup begins, and Windows would eventually offer a limited offline setup path. For years, this worked. It wasn't well publicized, it wasn't officially supported, but it worked. And a meaningful community of privacy-conscious users, IT professionals, and people with unreliable internet access relied on it. Then Microsoft started closing the cracks, one at a time. With Windows 11 version 24H2, Microsoft quietly removed the official documentation for the bypass NRO command. It still functioned for a while, but it was no longer something Microsoft would help you find or acknowledge. Then, in a blog post attached to a preview build numbered 26222, Microsoft stated outright that it was removing known mechanisms for creating a local account in the Windows setup experience. I'll read that phrase again. Not improving, not simplifying. Removing known mechanisms. That's a company explicitly telling you it is hunting down and eliminating the specific workarounds people have been using to avoid its account requirement. Microsoft's stated justification is that skipping these setup screens can leave a device not fully configured for use. Language that, on its face, sounds like it's about ensuring things like internet connectivity and security updates are properly set up. But critics have been quick to point out the obvious tension in that explanation. A local account can be made every bit as secure as a Microsoft account, using strong passwords and hardware-backed encryption through the TPM chip that's already required on every Windows 11 machine. Security was never really the technical constraint. What critics argue is really being protected here is a business model, one where an account is the anchor point for OneDrive upsells, Microsoft 365 subscriptions, Copilot integration, Game Pass, targeted advertising, and the kind of usage telemetry that turns an operating system into a continuously monitored product rather than a one-time purchase. And then came June 2026, which is where the story escalated from a slow-burning complaint into a genuine controversy. After the June Patch Tuesday cumulative update, users flooded Reddit's r Windows 11, the Microsoft community forums, and enthusiast sites with fresh reports that even the bypass NRO command itself had started getting reset or blocked after installation. One widely upvoted forum post described doing a clean install using the bypass command, only to have a subsequent cumulative update quietly revoke local account privileges and force the machine back toward a Microsoft sign-in. That's not a one-time setup hurdle anymore. That's Microsoft reaching back into an already configured machine and undoing a choice the user had deliberately made. It gets worse for IT departments and businesses, too. Windows 11 Pro has historically been the version where group policy settings gave administrators granular control, including the ability to enforce local accounts across an organization's fleet of machines for compliance or security reasons. Reports from June 2026 indicate that some of these group policy settings are now simply being ignored by recent builds, meaning IT administrators who configured their systems one way are finding Microsoft's defaults overriding their explicit policy choices. For any organization that takes device management seriously, that's not a minor inconvenience. That's a loss of administrative control over hardware the business owns and is responsible for securing. The real-world consequences of all this fall hardest on two groups of people who often get overlooked in these conversations. First, users in regions with poor, expensive, or unreliable internet connectivity, for whom a mandatory online setup isn't just annoying, it can mean being functionally locked out of a computer they already paid for until they can get a stable connection. Second, privacy-conscious users who specifically do not want their diagnostic data, advertising ID, and usage patterns tied to a single centralized identity. Windows 11 setup screens have increasingly become a funnel toward exactly that kind of centralized profile, and forum threads from June 2026 are full of users pulling direct quotes from Microsoft's Services Agreement and privacy policy, highlighting the specific language that permits data collection for product improvement and advertising purposes. So what are people actually doing about it right now? As of mid-2026, a shrinking but still functional set of options remains, though each one is getting more technical and more fragile with every update cycle. The most reliable method still involves denying the setup process a network connection in the first place, either by not connecting to Wi-Fi during OOB, unplugging the Ethernet cable before the setup process starts, or, for anyone building virtual machines, removing the virtual network adapter before first boot and re-adding it after setup completes. Without a network connection, Windows still for now falls back to offering a local offline account path. For people doing clean installs from a USB drive, tools like Rufus, the popular open source Windows installation media creator, have added features that modify the Windows 11 ISO itself before installation even begins, stripping out the Microsoft account requirement along with other contested requirements like TPM and secure boot checks. The developer behind Rufus has publicly confirmed on social media that new beta versions are specifically being updated to counter each new bypass Microsoft closes off, essentially turning this into an ongoing cat and mouse game between one independent developer and one of the largest software companies on Earth. For advanced users and IT professionals managing multiple machines, there's the option of building an unattended answer file, a configuration file, typically named AutoUnattend, XML, that gets placed on the installation USB drive and tells Windows Setup exactly how to configure the machine, including specifying a local account directly. This is the most robust method because it bypasses the interactive setup screens entirely, but it requires comfort with editing XML configuration files by hand, which puts it well outside the reach of an average user just trying to set up a new laptop. None of these solutions are things a typical non-technical person should reasonably be expected to know or do, and that's precisely the point critics keep coming back to. When using an operating system in the way it used to work by default, now requires third-party tools, edited configuration files, or physically manipulating your network hardware. Something has broken in the basic relationship between a company and the customers who paid for its product. Let's talk about why this particular fight has become such a lightning rod, because Windows has made unpopular changes before without triggering this level of sustained anger. Part of it is simply duration. A 5-year pattern of incrementally removing the same feature, explained away with slightly different justifications each time, reads to a lot of users as a deliberate long-term strategy rather than a series of unrelated product decisions. There's also a trust problem layered on top of the technical one. Software companies ask users to accept updates on faith constantly. Faith that a patch fixes a bug rather than removing a feature. Faith that a new default is there to help rather than demonetize. When a workaround that used to function suddenly stops working after what's ostensibly a routine cumulative update, with no changelog entry specifically flagging it, users reasonably start to wonder what else might quietly change without warning. The March 2026 case of local account users getting locked out entirely after a forced Microsoft account password reset, with zero advance notice, is exactly the kind of incident that turns simmering frustration into genuine distrust. People don't just want their computer to work, they want to know that the way it works today won't be silently rewritten tomorrow. It's also worth stepping back and asking why this matters beyond the technical Windows enthusiast crowd who frequents forums and subreddits. Windows still runs on the overwhelming majority of the world's desktop and laptop computers, across households, schools, libraries, small businesses, and government offices. Decisions made in Redmond about how account setup works don't just affect people who read tech news. They affect a retiree setting up a laptop for the first time, a student in a rural area with spotty internet, a nonprofit running budget hardware, or a small business owner who just wants a machine that boots up and lets them work. Those are exactly the users least equipped to hunt down an XML answer file or use a modified Rufus ISO. The technical workarounds exist, but they function as a kind of tax on technical literacy. Those with the skills and patience get to preserve their old level of control, and everyone else simply accepts whatever Microsoft decides the default should be. Now, here's a twist worth understanding, because the story isn't entirely one-directional. There are signs, as recent as June 2026, that some internal pressure at Microsoft is pushing back against this trajectory. Reporting indicates that Microsoft has been quietly considering dropping the forced Microsoft account requirement from Windows 11 setup altogether, with internal teams reportedly working on bringing back a real supported local account option. This isn't coming out of nowhere. Public figures including Epic Games CEO Tim Sweeney and Elon Musk publicly pressured Microsoft on this exact issue back in November 2025. There's also a broader pattern showing up elsewhere in Microsoft's ecosystem. The Edge browser is gaining the ability to sign in with a Google account instead of a Microsoft one. And Microsoft has started letting users remove Bing from Windows Search entirely, something the company had resisted for years. Whether that adds up to a genuine change in direction or just a temporary goodwill gesture ahead of the next wave of Copilot and AI feature integration is genuinely unclear, and reasonable people disagree about which it is. Skeptics point out that Microsoft has walked back friendlier policies before, once the news cycle moved on. Optimists point to the specific, concrete internal roadmap changes, like the Google sign-in option for Edge, as evidence that something structural really is shifting, not just a PR statement. What's not in dispute is the core tension driving all of this. On one side, Microsoft has legitimate reasons to want devices online and properly configured. Software updates need connectivity. Security patches need to reach machines promptly, and a signed-in account genuinely does unlock real useful features for people who want them. On the other side, an operating system is not a subscription service by nature, and for decades, using one didn't require identifying yourself to the company that made it. The people pushing back aren't rejecting the idea of Microsoft accounts. They're rejecting the idea that the choice has been quietly taken away from them, replaced by a maze of dark patterns, deprecated documentation, and increasingly fragile third-party workarounds just to get back something that used to be a standard checkbox in setup. So where does this leave you practically right now in the middle of 2026? If you're comfortable with a Microsoft account and want the syncing and integration benefits, none of this changes anything for you. The default path works exactly as Microsoft intends. But if you specifically want a local, offline account, your options are narrowing every single update cycle, and the workarounds that still exist require real technical effort, pulling your network cable, editing configuration files, or relying on independent tools like Rufus that are racing to stay one step ahead of Microsoft's own engineering team.